Good afternoon. My name is Philo. At least that's the name I go by now. A little more on that a little later. For now, all you must know is that I'm a slave, yes, a slave of Cappadocian descent. Where's Cappadocia, you might ask? Well, I think you call it modern-day Turkey, or at least a part of it. And even the exact location isn't quite that important as for you to know that I'm a non-Jewish slave in a Jewish household in Jerusalem. Now, our experience of slavery was maybe a little different than what you have in mind. Yes, perhaps there were some harsh masters from time to time. Some slaves were still treated harshly. But it wasn't that slaves were from one ethnic background or one so-called race. You see, almost anyone could end up a slave of anyone else if it came to that. For some, it was a means of survival. For others, it became a regular way of life, using the skills they had. Some even were able to find almost a family, almost a home. Yes, I knew that I was one of the lucky ones. Our master was good and understanding, kind and gracious most of the time. Oh, he demanded quite a bit from us and was very displeased when we messed up. But we served him gladly because he and his family usually treated us with dignity and at least as much respect as you would expect anyone to treat a slave. But I was still a little taken aback when he came around the corner one day and said to me, this is Peter and John. Show them the kataluma, the guest room, the upper room, so that they could prepare the Passover for their teacher there. This was news to me. They didn't have a reservation. I didn't see their names written there. I didn't know who Peter and John and their teacher were. They didn't look like the sort of people my master usually hosted for his dinner parties. But I knew that my master would be celebrating his Passover celebration on the main level with his family and his guests. So the kataluma, the upper room, was open and empty. So why not let them use it? I was thankful that we normally kept the kataluma ready for the dinner parties my master would host. The table and the tables and couches were all up there. We didn't have to schlep anything up the stairs. And I was relieved. And after I showed them the ins and outs and the basics of where everything was, that they released me to my other duties that day. I had plenty to do to help my master get ready for his Passover celebration. But as the day went on, I actually got a little sheepish, a little ashamed of myself for not putting two and two together a little earlier. You see, the word began to get around that Jesus was going to celebrate the Passover here. Oh, that's who this Peter and John were. That's who their teacher was. Now, I wouldn't have called my master a disciple of Jesus. He hadn't, after all, left everything to follow him like those other 12 guys had. But I would have called him a friend of Jesus. Yes, a friend. You see, whenever Jesus was nearby, in or near Jerusalem, my master would go and spend time with him, listen to him teach, even have dinner with him. I knew he had dinner with him at Mary, Martha, and Lazarus' house out in Bethany quite a few times. And so the household became a little bit more abuzz, a little more excited to hear that Jesus was going to be here. He wouldn't be with my master, he would be in the upper room, but still to have him there was quite exciting indeed. But it was strange to us that none of us had been told to help serve the meal. And none of us had been told to help them really in any way other than some of the odds and ends that they asked us for throughout the day. But I was certain that when it came to it, there would be one job that I would be called on to do for them. You see, as I got to talking with them after I knew who they were, they said that Jesus and the rest of the disciples would be coming from Bethany later that evening to celebrate the Passover. And Bethany was about 15 stadia outside the city walls, and it was about 2 miles outside the city walls. And so it was an easy walk, but the roads in Jerusalem were pretty well paved and fairly clean. And as far as country roads go in and out of Jerusalem, the road to Bethany was a decent road, but their feet over a 2-mile walk still would have gotten dusty and dirty. They would have wanted them washed, at the very least before they sat down, reclined for dinner on the couches in the kataluma. And that was, I thought, where I would come in. You see, in our day, foot washing fell to the lowest male slave of the household. And as the youngest non-Jewish slave, that was yours truly. And let me help you understand something about feet in our day, the way we understood feet. They were stinky, smelly, dirty, grimy, gross, cracked, worn, stinky, ugly feet. There was nothing glamorous or glorious about that task. There was no reason to feel honor or privilege to wash someone else's feet. That's why it fell to the lowest slave. And I knew that Jesus didn't have any so-called slaves or servants traveling with him, so I figured I would get the call when the time came. Well, evening came, and Jesus and the disciples kind of snuck in through the outer staircase up to the Cataluma. We hardly knew they were there, except we heard some more shuffling and more noise and commotion up above us. Still, no order came. Well, I got to thinking, though. Maybe that was part of what Peter and John were supposed to do as they served the Passover that night. Maybe it was, maybe they took turns doing it, or maybe there was someone in their ranks who was lowest on the totem pole. Maybe they didn't let anyone else on, but they knew who that was, and it was always their job. But I couldn't quite shake the feeling. You see, I didn't want my master to seem like a rude host. He had told us of one time he had been at dinner with Jesus at a Pharisee's house. And the Pharisee had neglected to have anyone offer to wash his feet or anyone else's feet for that matter. And came this woman of the town, this sinful woman known to everyone. And she washed Jesus' feet with her tears, with her hair. Our master made it clear on no uncertain terms that whether it was Jesus or anyone else, nothing like that would ever happen in his house. And so I wondered, had he just forgotten to tell me? Had he figured I would just know that it was my job to go up and wash their feet when the time came? I would have been so glad to get out of it for once, but I knew I should maybe just go up and check. So I started walking up quietly, slowly. I could tell things were settling down. They were getting ready for dinner, and I didn't want to cause a disturbance or commotion. And so when I got to the top of the stairs, the outer staircase, I just kind of peeked around the corner a little bit. I could see two of the disciples at first glance, and they were staring at something across the room. And then they looked at each other with a shocked look on their face. They were almost ashen from what they saw. So I was curious. I had to peer around a little more, see what was going on. I could tell that yes, someone had started washing feet. Whew, I thought. Off the hook, dodged a bullet there. Then as I turned to go back down the stairs, I heard Peter. Now I had heard Peter's voice as I talked with him throughout the day, so I knew who it was, and he was plenty loud enough. Let me tell you that. He said, "Lord, do you wash my feet?" I froze. Who was washing feet in there? I heard another softer voice say, "What I'm doing, you don't understand now, but afterward you will understand." Peter again. "You shall never wash my feet." The quieter voice. "If I don't wash you, you have no share with me." At this point, a little sense of dread began to fall over me as I thought about who just might be washing feet. And then Peter again. "Lord, and not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." Oh. He'd said it twice. Lord. Now I knew who was washing feet in there. Jesus, the teacher, my master's friend, was doing the foot washing. I was so embarrassed, so ashamed. I knew I was out of a job for sure. The thought that my master's friend was washing feet, I started to get angry at the disciples even. Why had they let him do this? They should never have let him wash the feet. They should have at least come down and gotten me and said, hey, it's time to wash feet. And so it was all I could do to keep from barging in and say, no, Jesus, stop, I'll do it. That would have gotten me kicked out for sure. I couldn't barge in, but I didn't want to just go back down the stairs yet either. So I kept on listening as it got quiet again, and as I heard some shuffling and thought that Jesus must be going back to his seat. I heard him say to them, do you understand what I have done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you're right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should do as I have done to you. Once again, let me be clear about one thing. Masters or teachers never washed the feet of their servants or slaves or disciples. It was unheard of. It was actually considered dishonorable for them to do so. And so for Jesus, the master, the teacher, to stoop and wash his disciples' feet like a common slave, well, that stuck with me. I had overstayed my welcome. I hadn't been found out and didn't want to be found out for being up there, so I tiptoed down the staircase. But what I'd seen and heard stuck with me throughout the evening as I got down to wash the feet of my master and his family and his guests. Now, we'd heard the rumors too, us slaves. Was this Jesus, this Messiah, this long-awaited king the Jewish people were looking for? As a non-Jewish slave, I wasn't sure exactly what to make of it or why that might impact me, but after seeing what I had just seen, I began to think, well, if they want to make that guy king, maybe that wouldn't be so bad after all. But I believe you know the story, how any thoughts or dreams or hopes like that were pretty well dashed by 24 hours later, as Jesus lay dead. So my thoughts began to swirl again. If that's how they treat their kings, especially kings who do things like that, I don't want any part of it. I don't want to be anywhere close to here. But it's not like I could just up and leave of my own volition either. I was a slave. I didn't have many resources. Runaway slaves, weren't treated all that great either. So I kept my head down, kept working, and just trying to make sense of it all. But I shouldn't have worried so much. It became clear to me a few days later. I knew something was up when my master called a household meeting. Again, that was something that never happened. He dealt with us one-on-one. He never brought anything before the whole house, all the slaves all together. No, one-on-one and to gather us all together. He never did that. But there we were, after our evening chores were done, he gathered us up in the Cataluma, up in the room where Jesus had celebrated the Passover with his disciples. And we all looked at each other. What's going on? What are we doing here? Is the master gone crazy? What's happening? I don't know. Then the master came up the stairs and came in, and we could see that something had changed. He'd been pretty down ever since Jesus had been crucified. But now he was happy again, almost giddy. Got us settled down, and he started in. Many of you know that I tried to be near Jesus of Nazareth anytime he was around Jerusalem. I went to hear him teach, to learn from him. I ate with him. Yes, he might have called me his friend. But I'll be honest with you, even I wasn't sure exactly what to make of him until now. Most of you also heard how he was crucified, how our religious leaders believed he was a false teacher, leading people away from God, a blasphemer. And I guess the Roman authorities thought that there was just enough threat that he could disturb the peace and order, be a rabble-rouser, that they could conspire together to have him crucified. And yet now I know that he is who he said he is. He is the Messiah. He is the Son of God. And now he had our attention, mind you. You see, Jesus is no longer dead. His tomb is empty. You can go and see it for yourself. Yes, the story's being spread that the disciples stole the body. How they think that they got past the guards, I'll never understand. But the disciples, they say they've seen him alive. They've touched him, eaten with him. And others too, besides the 12, have said the same thing. And I believe it. I trust their testimony. And you need to know this. Because you need to know that for me and my household, we will, from this time forward, follow and serve this Jesus as Lord and Savior, and hold him in the highest allegiance in our hearts and minds. I'll tell you what I know, what I learned from hearing him. I can bring one of the 12 if you'd like, for you to learn and listen from them. But I also want you to know that if you want nothing to do with an out-and-out Jesus follower, or if you're scared of what it might mean as the chief priests and Pharisees try to wrap their minds around it, or as the Roman authorities try to figure out what it means that there are still Jesus followers around, we'll be free to go. I'd even give you a little bit to help you on your way. Of course, if you're willing to stay, you can continue to work with me, work for me. I'll provide for all your needs still. And if you're willing to listen, if you're willing to learn, and if you too come to believe in Jesus as Lord and Savior, well, then I will have to follow his example. You see, I've heard that he doesn't call his disciples servants or slaves. He calls them friends. And that's what I would call you as well. There, now you know your master's business. I'll give you a couple days. Well, I didn't need a couple days. It was an easy decision for me to make. After what I'd seen and heard in the Cataluma, I'd gladly followed this servant king. I knew I had a lot to learn about Jesus, about this God the Jews worshipped, and how these Christians said was there in Jesus. But if what I had seen and heard in the Cataluma was a picture of the way that God served us, cared for us, was willing to do whatever it took for us, and that was the God I wanted to follow too. It was just about that time that I had people start calling me Philo. You see, that name basically means friend. I was glad to be a friend of my master, yes. I was even more glad to be a friend of the Lord, the Master, the Teacher, Jesus. After all, if he washed feet, I could wash feet. If he washed feet, I knew nothing was beneath me. I could serve and help anyone with any need they had because that's the example he had given me. I'm not greater than he is, am I? You're not greater than he is, are you? I see here that in this season, you have a reminder of the way he gave his life to serve all people that day after he was in my master's house. And I'm reminded of one final thought. The final thing I heard as I was running, tiptoeing down the stairs that night. Jesus told his disciples, if you know these things, blessed are you if you do them.